Hello, and welcome back to another edition of Curtis Jones Writing. I'm reading all the chapters of all the books I've written. I've got about 14 books, so uh, I expect to spend about a year getting this done. This is the last chapter of Dad's Old Truck, Volume 2. I produced Volume 1 over about 12 or 13, 11 or 12, something like that, chapters. And this is the last chapter of Dad's Old Truck, Volume 2, the continuing saga of one little boy. And the title of this chapter is Final Stop, Modesto. And I didn't know it then, but my life made a very big change after we got back to Modesto. And that'll be in other books that I present. If you get in a hurry to hear these stories, you can go to my web page, which is curtis-jones-books.squarespace.com. And there's links there to take you over to Amazon where you see all of them. Of course, that web page describes every book that I've written and what the books are about. And the Amazon site will let you purchase the paperbacks, or you could also purchase the ebook form. And this is my Facebook page, which is Curtis Jones Author page on Facebook. It'll do much the same thing that this site does, and I think you might enjoy them. Both of them have a link that goes to the Montgomery Public Library, where they recorded one of the seminars I used to produce before uh, COVID came, and so it's recorded on their site uh, from the link on either one of these pages. So let's get right down to it in just a second. I know I had said that when I finished this one, these Love Endures All Thing books uh, continue my life's history for the next 45 years after I finish this one. But my editor and I talked, and I'm going to read this book next because it has stories that lead in and help you be acquainted with what I'm going to do there. This has 9 chapters, I think, something like that. Let's see. And it has poems I've written, and what is it? It's got poems and then short stories that I entered in contests that I placed, but I didn't ever win money from the contest. I got in second or third or fourth place, and they published them in their e-magazines, but I never got paid for them. So I figured if I was giving them away, I'd do it here. Uh, the stories are afterwards a very short story about a person driving and what happens. What's Behind the Green Door, another contest story that I wrote. The Man and the Angel, uh, which is an imaginary story. The Motorcycle Gang is a story about my wife Stephanie and I dating. The Curse is a story I made up. Reflections of Desires is a story that didn't really fit in any of the other books, but it was a story that I imagined from going to secondhand stores with my wife. Uh, Out the Window is a little short story that happened about 8 years ago, 10 years ago. And then The Power to Love Endures, or The Power of Love Endures. And then it's got a little something about the author in here. But that'll be the next book that I read. And all of these are available at Amazon. So let's get started with the last chapter of this book, Dad's Old Truck, Volume 2. And it picks up from Lincoln High School that I just finished telling that story. My big sister Betty and her husband Lee were living with us when Mom and Dad decided we were going to move back to Modesto. It was midsummer when we started preparing for the trip. We would go through Yellowstone National Park on the way. Dad wanted to go through the most northern route to make the trip. So we ended up going through Yellowstone, went into Montana and Wyoming and into Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and then down to California. It was a long trip. Dad said I would have to sell my 1953 Chevy because he didn't think it would make the trip, and he was probably right. I was sad about the loss of my car. I was also happy to go back to California. He sold the car to his old friend for $50, which is what I had paid for it. I never received a single penny from it. I think Dad kept the money. By this time, I had used up all my savings and everything I'd earned in between. I would not have had the money to bring my car anyway. As we traveled, we would camp for the night all the way out there. Dad still had the trailer he had built. Mom and Dad put their bed on top under a canvas. The girls slept in the station wagon that Mom had. I still slept in the pickup. It was a tight fit nowadays for me. Betty and Lee slept in their '57 Chevy that they still had. When we started, we went through Wichita, Kansas to see Dad's baby brother, Uncle Sam. He was my favorite uncle of all time. He still is. Uncle Sam had a wife and two sons at the time. I had a special love for my Uncle Sam ever since I can remember. I think he was only like 12 years or 13 years older than me. We spent the first night in Wichita. I was just a young man. I didn't get to visit with Uncle Sam very much. It was a time when children were meant to be seen and not heard. Though I was in my mid teens, I still had to behave as a child when the adults began to talk. I did get to talk to Uncle Sam a little that night anyway. It was a great visit, I thought. We were in bed before I wanted to be, for we were getting up early to get a good start. We made very good time the second day. Soon we were in Wyoming, just north of Colorado. We pulled into a campsite that belonged to an Indian reservation. It had bathrooms and running water. There was a beautiful little creek that passed through the site. We camped next to it. The ranger came by just as we were getting ready to throw a fishing line in the water. He commanded that we stop right there. It seemed that all the fish in the creek belonged to the Indians. The Wind River Indian Reservation is an Indian reservation made for the eastern Shoshone and northern Arapaho tribes. All the game, animals, and fish belong to them by treaty. This was a wonderful campsite, though. We all enjoyed it. Betty and Lee used a pallet beside the car, as did I by the station wagon. The girls slept in the wagon, Mom and Dad in the trailer under that tarp. I sat on the bank of the Wind River and watched the lovely trout swimming by as though I were not even present. They were big and beautiful creatures. Mom had supper ready in a little while. Her and Betty did all the cooking, and the younger girls did the cleanup. I drove Mom's station wagon all the way out to California. If I if you have never driven a car that belongs to your mom with her riding in the front seat with you, you have missed a wonderfully educational experience. This is when I learned to keep two hands on the wheel, to keep my eyes on the road. I also learned not to follow too closely. I also learned never look at who is talking with me. Within a day, I became a dutiful driver. Mom was the co driver. As we entered the Grand Teton National Park, I was, it, I was delighted by the sheer beauty of nature left to its own. The lakes were azure blue and difficult to distinguish from the skies. The trees were several different colors of green. Some greens were as dark as night, and others were as pale as spring leaves. The ground and the rocks made a palette of browns, grays, oranges, and reds. The scenery was a feast for the eyes. Yellowstone National Park is on the northern border of the Grand Teton National Park. As we left Grand Tetons, we entered Yellowstone. They were both lovely, but grandeur of the Tetons made me happier. Yellowstone had many water attractions, some boiling, some were cold to the touch. There were pools that were as clear as glass and so deep that the bottoms were not visible from the darkness. Others had blue, gold, or orange tints to the water and steaming even in the summer. There were white staircases built by the deposits of material brought to the surface by hot springs. We waited for a little while to see Old Faithful erupt. Dad's patience ran out, and we left 15 minutes before it went off. We were all disappointed over that. Dad was lord of the expedition, though. There were beautiful waterfalls scattered throughout the park. The road would become bland, and the next corner revealed a pretty waterfall. It was a nice drive through the park. I I will go back someday when I can take the time, when I am lord of the expedition myself. As we drove through Montana, we came to see a bold sight in the distance. It was a bright red strip of clay that ran the full height of a butte, maybe 500 or 5 miles ahead of us. The red earth looked like a huge red slide that ran down the side of the tall hill. The signs along the road called it Devil's Slide. It impressed me enough to remember all these years later. If you ever get the opportunity to see the Devil's Slide, you should do it. It is near the town called Corwin, Corwin Springs, I'm sorry, Montana. The Devil's Slide might sound like a chief attraction for an amusement, but it is just a geological oddity that can be seen for miles. When we got to the northwest part of Montana, we decided to stop for lunch on the side of the road at a wide pull off. As Betty and Mom made ready for lunch, there was time for Lee and I to explore. There was just to the north side of the road an opening that looked like a cave. Lee and I climbed a steep bank about 100 foot above the cars. There was an opening to a cave. It looked like a natural opening. We climbed down to the entrance of the great hole, which narrowed like a funnel as it came to the entrance. We could hear the squeaks of bats inside and decided not to go in. As we climbed out to the rim of the cave, we sat there and someone in the campsite took our picture. As we started down the steep bank, I slipped and slid and rolled all the way down to the bottom. I was bruised and scraped up, but not hurt otherwise. It certainly gave everyone a scare. We were told not to do anything like that again. The trip then took us through the panhandle of Idaho. It was a steep and dangerous drive. The road was cut out of the mountainside so steep that I doubt even the goats would visit them. All along the road, we had a view of the hillsides across the valley, like a great eagle in flight from his lofty vantage. We dropped from those staggering heights into a town called Coeur d'Alene. The drop was in short order, and our ears popped many times during the descent. The town was very neat. We didn't even slow down as we passed through. There was a very large lake that lay on the south of the town. I wanted to visit that town if I ever get back to the north. I had never been to Washington or Oregon before this. I have seen photographs of the two states. Those photographs must have been a different part of the state than I was seeing. It didn't look like the same place. It was more like a high desert than a lush green tree covered state that is always pictured for those two places. The terrain was mostly flat and featureless, with little grass and few trees. It was a shock to what I had seen on the rest of the trip. As we went further south, we began to see some apple orchards. We drove through Walla Walla, Washington, then came along the side the Columbia River. Man, that river is big. When we came into Oregon, we left the large river behind. We were in the high desert again. This would be the third night since we left Oklahoma. We should be getting to Modesto late the next day. Believe me, we were all ready for the trip to be over. When we went into Oregon, it was still high desert. We were soon able to see the eastern side of the range of mountains. It was also a little cooler that last day. The trip through Oregon went faster than what Washington seemed to take. We soon found ourselves in California. It didn't take long until we began to see tall, snow-capped mountains. They were enough to excite everyone. We stopped alongside the road, and Dad took motion pictures of the peaks off of the off in the distance. Lee and I walked down the road and back as he filmed us. I think everyone got in a hurry by this time because I don't remember much about the rest of the travel to Modesto. I think Dad had learned his lesson about moving without a job. He had a job when we got there. He was working for a fruit farm just north of Modesto. They were going to supply us a house, but it was not ready when we arrived. They let us camp on one of the farms for a couple of days while they finished the house. We were so glad to be under a roof again. Had it had running water and the privacy of your own bedroom. The owner of the farm were two brothers from Armenia. They were about 65 or 70 years old and kind of cranky. Dad had known them from the time he drove a truck hauling fruit to the canneries. Their names were Cy, the oldest, and Sid, the youngest. Their last name was Darpinian. I liked them okay. The Darpinian brothers had many farms they grew peaches and plums and apricots. They had a drying house. They hired Mom and Betty to work in their drying shed, and I was hired to drive a tractor to haul the fruit from the fields to the distribution yard. There it was to be loaded on trucks for packing houses, canneries, or the drying sheds. Dad went to work the day after we got there. The rest of us only went to work after we moved into the house. I really did like my job driving a tractor. I pulled a flatbed trailer that were loaded with 4 foot by 4 foot bins of mostly peaches. Sometimes we would get smaller boxes stacked 8 tiers high. If you were not careful with the boxes, you could spill a whole load all over the road. Fruit went all over the road when that happened. The highway patrol came out to direct traffic if that happened, and the company had to set or send a cleanup crew to pick up everything. It happened if you didn't have two brake pedals locked together when you tried to stop. It was a easy mistake to make if someone else had been on your tractor. The brake pedals were separate to help turn the tractor while sitting in one spot. The front would jerk to the left or to the right, depending on which brake pedal you pushed. I had a friend I met when I started there, Jack Cassidy. He and I always worked together every day. He was working there when I started. I eased his workload when I started there. Jack was 19, and when we worked that summer, we had time to talk when we got to the loading docks to offload our bins or boxes. We would also take lunch breaks together. Jack played a bass guitar in a band. He said that they played in bars Friday and Saturday nights. He also said they were cutting a record in San Francisco in a week. I didn't know whether to believe him or not, but I liked him well enough. I had tried to learn to play the guitar, but never got good, and soon I quit. Besides, it hurts your fingers. The last time I saw Jack was when he and I were hauling loads of boxes of peaches back to the docks. A car passed us and cut Jack off on the road. He slammed on his brake, and the tractor jackknifed, spilling the entire load of peaches all over the road. I stopped right behind Jack. He told me to take my load in and tell the bosses what had happened and send help. Jack had not locked the brake pedal together, only his left brake locked up and caused the jackknife. Jack was fired, and I never saw him again in person. I saw him on the American Bandstand show later that year. He was the bass guitar player for a band called the Jefferson Airplane. I thought it was cool to have known someone before they became famous. The classic lineup of Jefferson Airplane from October 66 to February 70 was Marty Ballin, he was a vocalist, Paul Kentner, guitar vocalist, Grace Slack, vocalist, Jorma Kawoni, lead guitar, Jack Cassidy, bass guitar, and Spencer Dryden, drums. I can't believe I knew someone like that. When school started that fall, I had to go to Downey High School, the arch rival of Modesto High School. Needless to say, I didn't fit in very well. Downey is where the rich kids went to school. Modesto is where the average to poor kids went. I was average to poor. My friend John Skaggs went to school at Downey this year, too. We each had someone we could hang out with now. I had met John through Mike Drury, my best friend. John was not like Mike. He was not rich either. We got along well. Years later, John was dating the girl I would eventually marry. Dad had told me, or Dad had sold me his 1959 Ford pickup while I was working on the farm. I had paid him every week until school started. I knew I would have to get a job soon so I could keep making the payments to Dad. Neither John or I cared for school, not very much. We hatched a scheme to take off every Friday afternoon. We could do whatever we wanted then. We decided we would get permission from the school principal to go see the GI recruiters every Friday for as long as we could get away with it. It worked pretty good for a while. We did eventually get caught ditching. The principal talked to our parents and the recruiters, and we had to face the music then. That concludes Dad's Old Truck, Volume 2. And when I get to that point, you'll hear what happened after we were caught ditching school. It's in Love Endures All Things, Book 1. But that'll have to wait until after I've done Imagination, which was one of my favorite books for the longest time. I hope you enjoyed Dad's Old Truck Volume 2. I hope you enjoyed Dad's Old Truck Volume 1. Go back and see it if you haven't seen it yet. Uh, Click the like button. Share this video with your friends. I think they'll enjoy it. The books I've written and the reading I do are fit for mixed company. They're fit for children. In fact, children may enjoy these things. And most of them have a life's lesson toward the end of them. And if I don't put a life's lesson toward the end, it's clear to see in the story. God bless you and take care of you. Until the next time I publish, I will let you go. Bye bye.